How a motor repair shop in Nagoya took over the American garage. In 1915, in the city of Nagoya, Japan, a 21-year-old named Masaburo Makita opened a small shop. It did not make anything new. It repaired things: lighting fixtures, electric motors, transformers. Anyone walking past it that year would have had no reason to remember the name above the door. Japan's industrial base was still young, electrification was barely reaching ordinary households, and there were 100 shops like it in 100 other cities. Nobody in that shop was dreaming about drills. They were dreaming about keeping the lights on in Nagoya. For the next 2 decades, the company grew the only way a repair business can: slowly and on reputation. By the 1930s, Makita had learned enough about motors to start exporting them, shipping generators as far as the Soviet Union. It was a meaningful step for a small Japanese firm, but it was still fundamentally an electrical contractor, not a manufacturer of anything that resembled the tools we'd recognize today. Then came the war. Like much of Japanese industry, Makita's facilities were threatened by Allied air raids, and the company relocated to the smaller city of Anjo to keep operating. That move turned out to be permanent. Anjo remains Makita's headquarters more than a century later. But in the years immediately following 1945, permanent was the last thing on anyone's mind. Japan's industrial base had been flattened. Survival was the strategy, not expansion. So here is the part of the story that tends to surprise people. The company that would eventually go head-to-head with American power tool brands across the globe didn't make its first power tool until 1958, 43 years after it was founded. For more than 4 decades, Makita meant motor repair, not tools you'd find on a job site. That first tool, when it finally arrived, was modest: a portable electric hand planer designed to smooth wood without the labor of doing it by hand. It doesn't sound revolutionary, and on the surface, it wasn't. But it was the first electric planer manufactured in Japan, and it gave the company something it had never had before: a product rather than a service. Later, that same year, Makita followed it with a portable wall chaser, a tool for cutting grooves into masonry. 2 products. That was the entire catalog. It was a strange time for a Japanese manufacturer to bet on power tools because the category was already dominated by American companies. Black & Decker had been building electric tools since the early 1900s and had spent decades cultivating the hardware store shelf in the United States. Names like Craftsman, sold through Sears, were already a fixture of the American garage. If you'd asked anyone in Ohio or Connecticut in 1958 who made power tools, the answer would have been unhesitating, and it would not have involved a single Japanese brand. But Makita didn't try to compete on the home turf of Black & Decker right away. Instead, it found a foothold somewhere else entirely. In 1959, the company shipped 1,300 of those electric planers to Australia, its first real export of power tools, sent to a market with a hungry construction industry and far less brand loyalty already locked in. It worked. The success convinced Makita's leadership to do something decisive: rebrand the entire company around power tools and list it on the stock exchange. The motor repair shop was formally becoming a tool company. Through the 1960s, the lineup grew: an electric circular saw, an electric drill, and Makita kept expanding its export markets one country at a time. It wasn't fast, it wasn't dramatic, but it was steady, methodical growth, built on the same instinct the company had relied on since 1915: figure out what the machine needs to do, then build something reliable that does it. The real inflection point came in 1969, and it's one most people outside the trade have never heard of. While the United States was putting a man on the moon, Makita released the 6500D, a drill powered by a separate rechargeable battery pack connected by a cord. It wasn't cordless in the way we define that term today, but it untethered the drill from the wall outlet, which was at the time a genuinely new way of thinking about portable power. Black & Decker had technically built a cordless drill years earlier, developed in partnership with NASA for use in space, but that was a specialized, expensive piece of aerospace engineering. Makita's contribution was different. It tried to bring battery power to ordinary tradespeople, not astronauts. The company spent the next decade refining that idea, and in 1978, after roughly 10 years of internal testing, it released the tool that would actually change the industry, the 601OD. It was a 7.2-volt cordless drill with a nickel-cadmium battery built into the handle, housed in molded green plastic that would become instantly recognizable on job sites throughout the 1980s. This was the format every cordless tool still basically follows: battery inside the grip, removable, rechargeable, interchangeable across an entire family of tools. By the late 80s, Makita had built out 15 different battery-powered tools that all shared the same battery and the same charger, an idea that sounds obvious now, but at the time was a meaningful piece of engineering discipline because it meant a tradesperson could buy into an entire ecosystem instead of a single tool. And that ecosystem is where Makita found its real opening into the American market. Through the 1970s, Black & Decker was the undisputed king of the consumer aisle. The brand homeowners bought without thinking twice. But it had never fully owned the professional tradesman's toolbox the way it owned the suburban garage. Plumbers, electricians, carpenters, framers, people who used a drill 8 hours a day and judged a tool by whether it survived being dropped off a ladder, were a different customer, with different standards. Makita's cordless lineup, reliable and interchangeable, started winning that crowd one job site at a time. Industry retrospectives on the rivalry would later note that Black & Decker held the lion's share of the consumer and industrial markets, but among tradesmen specifically, the professionals who actually lived with their tools, its share had shrunk to single digits, while Makita had become the default. By the mid-1970s, that pressure was already visible in Black & Decker's own numbers. The 1974 recession hit the company hard, and executives at the time pointed to a specific cause beyond the economic downturn: intensifying competition from Japanese and German manufacturers, with Makita named directly. An American company that had spent the better part of a century defining what a power tool was found itself, within 15 years of the 601OD's release, fighting for ground it used to take for granted. Makita didn't slow down. It built its first American manufacturing presence in 1970, formed Makita USA, and over the next 2 decades opened plants and offices across Europe, Canada, and beyond. It listed on stock exchanges in Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya. It became, and this matters, one of the very few major tool brands that stayed independent. While American giants spent the 80s and 90s buying each other up, Black & Decker absorbing DeWalt, then later merging with Stanley altogether to form Stanley Black & Decker, Makita answered to no parent company. It just kept manufacturing, expanding into new countries, and reinvesting in the next battery platform. That pattern repeated itself in 2005 when Makita introduced something called LXT, lithium-ion extreme technology, and became the first major brand to commit fully to an 18-volt lithium-ion cordless platform. Lithium-ion batteries were lighter, held a charge longer, and recharged faster than the nickel-cadmium packs that had defined cordless tools for almost 30 years. It was the same move the company had made in 1978, just one battery chemistry later, a spot where portable power was headed, and get there before the competition has to be dragged along. By the time American giants caught up, DeWalt, Milwaukee, and the rest all eventually built their own 18-volt and 20-volt lithium platforms. Makita had already been selling lithium tools for years and had a head start in the one thing that actually locks in customer loyalty in this industry: the battery ecosystem. Once a tradesperson owns a drawer full of batteries and chargers for one brand's platform, switching brands means replacing all of it, not just one tool. Makita understood that lock-in earlier than almost anyone, and it built an entire company strategy around being first to the next battery generation rather than competing purely on price. None of this happened through some single dramatic moment. There's no equivalent of an upset election or a hostile takeover in this story. It's the story of a company that took 43 years to make its first power tool and then never really stopped iterating after that, exporting to Australia when the home market wasn't ready, building a 7.2-volt cordless ecosystem a decade before anyone else thought it was worth the engineering effort, and betting on lithium-ion when nickel-cadmium still worked just fine. Today, Makita manufactures across more than a dozen countries, holds a position among the 2 or 3 largest power tool companies on Earth, and remains one of the only major names in the industry that nobody else owns. It still isn't the loudest brand on the shelf. It's just been quietly outlasting and out-engineering louder competitors for over 100 years, which, in an industry that worships horsepower and torque numbers, might be the least flashy success story you'll ever hear. And maybe that's exactly why it worked.